Hello, I think we're going. Oh, just had a weird zoom up happen. Somehow my webcam is malfunctioning. I have two of them on. I don't know what that means. I have the one that's like plugged in on and the built-in one. So, dumb. And pop-ups are happening. All right, let's get into it. So tonight we're going to talk about is eating meat natural for humans, obviously, because for animals, there's at least certain animals, there's not really any argument against it, right? It's what they're inclined to and kind of what they go for. So I thought I would just start off with my general thoughts on the subject of meat and humans' place in eating meat, because I mean, the reality is I'm not a scientist. I'm not an expert that can tell you exactly the genetic makeup, and all I can do is really research and come to a certain conclusion and an opinion and share that with you. So I'm going to kind of start kind of where I sit and some of the other arguments, or at least things that are going to come up, and it's something that you can take it or leave it, right? If that's something that you want to dig into more and back up, and when you have that uncle at Thanksgiving or Christmas saying, well, it's the circle of life, at least you have something to go off of. So I thought I would start with just my general beliefs about meat eating and our place in the world in connection to that. That came out poorly, sorry. So I think that eating meat may have been essential to our survival at some point. Sure. But I think that doesn't necessarily mean that it's natural, normal, or required. And there's so many different arguments. If you look, there's people that argue that we had carnivore diets. That was cavemen, so that's what we eat. And there's a lot that argue, no, we were more harvesters and gatherers, and we hunted when convenient. And there's arguments on both sides of that scientific community, but at least from what I understand, there's more for a herbivorous diet, or at least an omnivorous diet. And like I said, we'll kind of go into some of those as we go. But aside from, throughout our lives and the lives of humans, not us, the place of meat, it served its purpose, right? I don't think it was essential. If you look at a lot of poor families, typically didn't eat meat, right? If you look even in the 50s, for example, right? You didn't eat meat at every meal. And it was kind of a sign of wealth. And throughout history, it's kind of been a sign of wealth. And the wealthy have meat and the others don't. And it's just one of those things that either you had a farm or you went out and hunted and you got your own meat. And we've kind of moved away from that in general, right? It's very supermarket focused and not natural at all, the way that we eat and collect and have our meat, right? It doesn't look like the animal. We didn't have any part in skinning it and preparing it, and we cook it, which is another thing that's weird. If it's natural, for example, for us to eat meat, why would we have to cook it? Because animals, like lions and bears and tigers, they don't cook their meat beforehand, and that comes really naturally to them. So, yeah, I'm just gonna keep digging into some of this stuff that I believe here for a minute. And I think something that's important to discuss, because there's a lot of misconception, is that, at least for me, I recognize that there's some people that can't go vegan, that it's not practical, right? For some people who are up in the Arctic, or maybe they have First Nation traditions and they depend heavily on animals for food, and they don't have access to fruits and vegetables, what else are they going to do? I understand that, and I get that. In general, vegans don't really advocate for those types of people to stop eating meat. I mean, the real thing is they need to have better access to fruit and vegetables. I saw a post a couple months ago, and someone was showing how a veggie tray, those terrible veggie trays you get at a party, was $75. And I would not buy that for $75. That's not practical. So accessibility is really essential and important when it comes to what's natural and what is the best diet or the best choice. And meat can definitely serve its place because it's something that's high in calorie, high in nutrients, even if there's some bad stuff that comes with it. And if it's kind of between eating and not, definitely it makes sense. And I think that's something that we've evolved to do when we need it, right? We can process it even if it's not what our bodies were designed to take in. And we'll kind of get through and into that as we go on. But I think like the big thing too is recognizing that wherever meat started in our diets and our lives, that's not where we are today, right? Like there's such a protein obsession and fast meals and quick meals and these animals growing as quick as possible and as many as possible. And it's just not normal. It's not a natural thing. So one thing that you'll hear a lot is people talk about the circle of life. And lions are always being brought up to vegans, and I don't really know why people are comparing ourselves to lions, because we're very different animals, right? So I think it's important to note vegans are not trying to stop lions from eating antelope. It's natural, sure, that's normal. That's, the circle of life. And I think there's a balance, right? And there's this idea that humans are part of that balance, but we're doing things that have thrown it so off, right? With lions, right? Like they hunt and maybe they don't eat, every day, and they don't eat multiple meals. And there is a balance, right? Like they feed off of each other. And, if you watch The Lion King, their body goes back to the earth. There is that. But when you look at like what humans are doing, that's not part of the circle of life, right? We're producing animals at such a large amount in large quantities and making it so easy. There's no effort, there's no anything. You just walk in and pick it up. And that's not normal and natural. And there's, waste and everything, the environmental impacts of having all those animals and having them funnel through. And there's no going back to the earth. It's polluting the earth quite literally in some cases in our waters, right? Like the runoff from pig farms and even fishing, right? The water and the contamination and the diseases from farmed fish run into our waters, and all of these things aren't natural and aren't part of the circle of life. So what we're doing, no, I would say the circle of life doesn't apply in my opinion. And maybe it did at one point. And I think that's okay, right? Like maybe there was a place for us, years and years ago, and that made sense, but it's not today. And I think there's also this belief that because something is natural, that it's good. And if you think of other natural urges that humans have, really though, is eating meat one of them? Like I wouldn't go up and bite a deer, right? Like that's not a natural urge. But you think of our senses and our pleasure and everything, right? Like, is it natural to, I'm trying to find a good one. It's not a good one. Is it natural to have sex with a minor? It was at one point, way the way girls were. And then we smartened up and we realized like consent's important and women aren't property and this doesn't make sense. And just because it's a desire and like a natural process of humans doesn't mean that it should be done. So there's conscience that comes into play when we talk about nature and what makes the most sense. And again, accessibility and what our options are, because it's not something that we need to do. So this was one that Hope had asked about, and it's something that I hear a lot. It's about canines or incisors, right? Like why do some of us have pointy teeth, right? And I would just say that teeth are not necessarily, they can be connected to what an animal eats, but they aren't necessarily. And a great example of that is pandas. So pandas are herbivores and they eat bamboo and they have these big giant, teeth. Same with apes, right? They eat primarily plant-based, but they have those big teeth, right? But they're not meat-eating animals necessarily. There's times where they will kind of deviate from that, but that's not their purpose or their main function or the way that their body is designed. So it's important to note, just because you have those doesn't mean that you're a meat eater. And going back to what I mentioned before, just imagine going up and biting a cow. How is that going to go for you? It's not going to go well. It's probably going to taste awful. Hairy, I imagine. Cows have hair, right? And sure, you might leave an indent and hurt the cow. If you're really persistent and you pinch, maybe you'd rip something off, but what you got would not be something that you want to eat. It would be disgusting, right? Like if you managed to like get that, you would not want that. It's not prepared. It's not, we don't eat that, right? Like we only really eat meat when it's disconnected from the animal and it's separated and pulled. We're true like carnivores or meat eaters. That's how they're designed. They have those big teeth that go up and down, and they can have chunks kind of just pull out, and they have the claws and things to go with it, which we don't have, right? We have these nails. These are not claws. We have thumbs, which is, shows that we are probably gathering and picking things up. It doesn't really, from a predator perspective, right? Like, and sometimes my nails are sharp, but I'm not going to kill somebody with them, right? So there's just things that show that we're not really designed, or at least if we were, we're not anymore, right? Because there's been evolution and we've grown as people, and you look at those charts and you see our hunches and we get up higher and taller, and some of those features maybe fade away, but evolution is part of it. And it doesn't have to just be like physical evolution, right? Some of that's our intelligence, our awareness, our technology. All of those things are part of evolution, and it's silly to continue something just because we've done it before. But I want to bring it back to teeth. So the other thing is we have molars, right? And that's for like grinding food. And true carnivores don't have that. We can also do this with our jaw. It's clicking. Maybe I shouldn't do that. But we can do that side to side stuff. And that's something that herbivores typically have in order to grind down their food, like the grains and all those things, where carnivores don't have to do that, right? It's up and down, it's ripping, it's tearing, it's chunks, and they don't need to grind it the way that we need to do. So there's definitely a lot of things. And when I was looking into this, right, like I started a list, did a little bit of research, and I discovered there's so much that we could talk about. And if there is something in particular that you do want to talk about, I'm happy to get into it. But I think if you do a Google search, for example, you're going to find so much, and you're going to find more than what I'm talking about. And you're going to always find someone that's trying to counter that argument. And I think the best thing that you can do is take a look at the info and decide what feels good to you. It's just, there's always a counter, right? Like one day eggs are in, one day eggs are out. And it's one of those things that happens with all types of science and evolution, and what, our bodies and what they're designed to do, meant to do, is one of those things that don't escape that. So another question that Hope had was, if meat is such a great source of protein, like surely we're designed to eat it. And there's a lot of things, again, that comes down to our biology that just shows that we're not really meant to get the protein that way. So like I said, this can become a rabbit hole, and that's not my intent, right? Like, I don't want it to go so far. But if you look at stuff like breast milk and how low the protein level is in breast milk, and our protein needs are relatively low as a species, like what we need. And a lot of the numbers that you see for protein aren't really what is recommended as the baseline, right? Like, there's such a protein push, and people think they need to eat a gram of protein per pound or more because of like the bodybuilding industry and just the ideas surrounding that, and it's not needed. So if you're eating enough calories and sufficient variety of plant-based foods, you should be able to meet those basic protein requirements without even really trying. It would be harder to not do it. But beyond that, I thought it would be good to just talk about some of the more of the body stuff, right? Like, we have the teeth, but intestines are important too. So our intestines are long and like they're windy, and a carnivore's is short and straight. And that's because the meat doesn't sit in there that long, right? It's meant to go in and go out and exit the body. So it's not like decomposing inside of you. And when we eat that, Sure, our bodies can digest it. If you've been away from it and you've ever gotten accidental meat broth or egg, our bodies have a hard time. They have to adjust. And our digestive juices aren't as acidic in ours versus like a carnivore's. So it's harder to digest that. And because of the length of our intestines, it's slower. So the meat will literally start to decompose and rot in our intestines. And that's one of the things that can lead to an increased risk in certain cancers like colon cancer, right? It's not meant to sit in there. And if for someone that eats, for example, a really meat heavy diet, and maybe that's all they have in there and they're not having a lot of fiber, that's really scary to me, right? I just can't imagine not being able to go and just living off the meat. So it's one thing to take into consideration. Our intestines are kind of, every animal has a slightly different length, but ours are longer, like herbivores. As we kind of already covered, we don't salivate at raw flesh, right? Like you don't see a deer on the side of the road and go, I'm hungry, I'm stopping, and I'm eating that, right? Like that's not most people's first thought. Maybe if you come from a hunting family, you might be like, yes, free meat. But for most people, they don't associate that, right? Like you don't see an animal being cut and prepared and go, I'm really hungry, I want to eat that. It's not until it's like separated from the animal and it's cooked and we put salt on it or seasoning and sauce that it becomes really appealing. And a lot of that is the texture and that it is calorie dense and it does have protein and those things that our body wants and needs. But without making it up that way, it's not really desirable. So I would say that that's not natural if we're not naturally inclined to go there. Another thing in terms of our body and that, does it make sense? Are we designed to be getting our protein from that is cholesterol. So cholesterol only comes from animal products, and humans produce their own cholesterol. So we don't actually need to take cholesterol in. And carnivores can actually, the cholesterol goes in and out. They don't hold on to it, where humans do. We have dietary cholesterol that affect our cholesterol numbers. And again, that's one of those things that you're going to see arguments on, but it happens, right? People with high cholesterol, there is dietary cholesterol. I guess what I'm trying to say is sometimes there's an argument to everything, and there is some contention of whether dietary cholesterol affects your cholesterol levels. But it seems like it does, because people have high cholesterol levels, go plant-based, and see a huge difference. And it makes sense that it would, if you're eating it and it's remaining in your body, that it would affect your levels. So that's one thing that's unavoidable. Animal products always have cholesterol. Our bodies aren't designed to process it and excrete it the same as it is for a carnivore. Another thing is vitamin C. So carnivores develop and produce their own vitamin C. And it's one of those things that people on the carnivore diet or a really extreme protein heavy keto type diet, they have to supplement with vitamin C. And that's because our body needs it and doesn't produce it, where carnivores does. So that shows that we are dependent at the very least on eating fruits and vegetables, right? I think a lot of us think citrus, but vitamin C is in a lot of different vegetables. For example, Brussels sprouts, right? And I wouldn't be like, yes, I'm getting in my vitamin C every time I eat a Brussels sprout, but those are foods that we would eat naturally and pull in from. Another thing to look at, and I had mentioned earlier, is chimpanzees, right? They're our closest relative, and they have those canines, and they eat primarily plants. But when it comes to chimpanzees and apes and things like that, they do eat bugs, and they can supplement with little bits of flesh. And a lot of that is convenience, right? Or opportunity. You can see, on the Nature Channel, you see them with their sticks and they're eating the ants and stuff. And, it makes up such a small portion of their diet. It's not really where they get their protein from or the most of their nutrients, but it's part of it. So, I think if we were to look at comparing that aspect, maybe we could be omnivorous. And maybe we were at one point, right? And now most of us are, right? Like most of us do that unless you are part of the carnivore diet group. And like that's okay if we were designed to do that. But there's so much that shows that we are able to just eat plants, that we were designed to eat plants. And there's very little argument really for a diet that is 90% plants versus 100%, until you look at some of the ethical and environmental things. But in terms of health, eating a primarily plant-based diet is something that we are predisposed to. Like we thrive on that. And whether that's a little bit of animal products, evolutionary wise, have helped us kind of stay in the calories, and especially when food was scarce, right? Like it makes sense that we are able to do that and we're able to have that. But that doesn't mean that we are designed to eat meat. I think that means, at least in my opinion, we can eat meat. We can choose to eat meat, but it's an unnecessary choice. And it's not necessarily natural in our current way and form, right? With the factory farming and what's happening. And it's not something that we do because we really like it. It's something that we do because we can, or because we have to in the past, because you don't like meat, right? Like you don't, the way that a lion looks like at an antelope. I'm not going to bring the lion back into this, but lions always seem to come up. And we don't look at that and go, that's a meal and I'm hungry and salivate and want that. It's not a natural reaction. It's not until we take the animal out of it and we make it a product and we season it and we do all that stuff to it that it really becomes appealing. And then it's like anything. It's like sugar. It's like, it's just one of those things that's addictive and makes us feel good, and it's a lot of calories, and our bodies want to pull that in and they want to keep eating it. So it's just, we've created a natural situation, and it's become normal. But what we're doing isn't natural. The factory farming isn't natural. The way that we're so disconnected with our food isn't natural. So I think, in my opinion, no, it's not natural. Maybe we are omnivorous, but we don't have to be. And at least most of us don't have to be, right? And that's a choice that you can make because our bodies are made to eat the plants. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts were. Did you learn anything? Do you completely disagree with me? I love a good disagreement. Or is there something that maybe someone has said to you that you're not sure about? Because I'm happy to get into that. But yeah, I think another important thing, just because it's natural doesn't mean that it's right. So, we've evolved, we're smarter, we're brighter, and we can make those choices. And there's grocery stores for most people everywhere, and plants are abundantly available. So I will see you guys next week. I got to put up the poll for the social call. I'm thinking maybe we will do it at the same time, and we'll just ditch one of these lives and throw in the call then, so everybody knows when to expect it, right? Like it's not trying to figure out a different date or a different time. I'll put a poll out though, so that way we're kind of all on board. Have a good night, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.